righty, good morning. We are doing our lesson here at the Prairie Center Church God of Prophecy in Olathe, Kansas, our adult Bible study or Sunday school lesson. We are doing a series on scriptures that are difficult to understand. And we're in lesson number 3, and I have yet to have a volunteer to take over any of these lessons. So just don't everybody jump up at once and volunteer for next week. No, going once. Okay. Well, you're stuck with me then. Thank you very much. But it's you learn something every time. No, I shouldn't say you learn something. I learn something every time I study these lessons. So I think for me, it's almost as much a benefit for me to study these as it is for you to hear them. But I learned a lot of new little limericks, you might say, these come from imprecatory psalms. Is that important? Does that sound important? And basically, to imprecate is to curse someone, or to the opposite of speaking a blessing onto someone. You're speaking a curse onto them. Now, does that sound like fun? Okay, so I looked up some of these, and one of my favorites, and you know, the Jewish tradition is full of these in their culture, and I was surprised that one of the most notable ones in my mind actually comes from a song. And when I looked up this song, it was not a huge surprise, but the author and the singer of this song is actually Jewish. So that's just an interesting note. His name is Jaron Lowenstein. He's a country star, and he has a song about praying for his significant other that has departed him unkindly. And so he went to church and asked for advice on how he should handle the situation, and the minister told him that he should pray for this person. And so this was his prayer: I pray your brakes go out running down a hill. I pray a flower pot falls from a windowsill and knocks you in the head like I'd like to. I pray your birthday comes and nobody calls. I pray you're flying high when your engine stalls. I pray all your dreams never come true. And then he said, I'll pray for you. Now, that doesn't sound like a very good prayer, does it? I found some others that were Yiddish curses, and one is, may you be bled dry by leeches, but enough blood should remain for the bed bugs, lice, and mosquitoes. And then it finishes, God willing. And one final one is, may your husband's father marry 3 times so that you may have 3 mother-in-laws. Now, those are comical, and it surprises a lot of people how much of that type of terminology and those types of imprecatory psalms there are in the Bible. But it's interesting that in the book of Psalms, we often think about that as praising God and thanking God and talking about the goodness of God and how he's our defender. But there are a number of psalms that are quite dark, and they're talking about, God, there are times when my enemies need to be destroyed, and I really can't wait for you to do that, God. I'm going to be joyful when you do that. And so that's one of those things that's hard for us to wrap our mind around. I'm getting a little feedback. Am I getting too close and getting too far away? I move back and forth, and that messes those guys up a little bit. Pull the mic closer. There you go. Okay. So when we look at those Psalms, we try to come to terms with that based on our New Testament ideals of, love your neighbor and do good to those that curse you and despitefully use you, and all of these types of things. We want to just all get along and don't be angry, and all of those kind of things that we think about as New Testament commandments. But we also have to recognize that the promise of God is that he will avenge the evils that are in this world, that God is a true and just God, and that there will be justice at times. And so when I hate to say the word celebrate, but when we have a hope for our future, we also can rest easy in the hope that God will bring judgment to those that have wronged his people, and that God protects us and will take care of us in that context. But as we look at the New Testament, just to get some, even though most of our lesson is going to be in the Old Testament, we want to make sure we understand that the New Testament and Old Testament don't conflict in their opinions about justice as it comes towards people, or vengeance is the word that is often used there. Romans chapter 2, verse 6. It says, who will render to every man according to his deeds? This is talking about God, of course. He says God is going to render every person or every man according to his deeds. You reap what you sow, that kind of concept, that is part of the New Testament theology as well. And so when we read about it in the Old Testament, it kind of matches up a little better for us. Continuing on in verse 8 of Romans chapter 2, it says, but unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first and also to the Gentile. That there is coming a time when there is going to be justice meted out to those that are exhibiting evil towards God's people. And when we see that God's judgment comes on people, we shouldn't be surprised. Because also in Romans, in the New Testament, Romans chapter 6, verse 23, many are familiar with the concept that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Okay? So when you perpetrate evil in your life especially against God's people, you have earned God's judgment, and God's judgment will come on you. Okay? Now, we all know that God's judgment is coming to the entire world, and we also know that there is a way of escape for that through the blood of Jesus on the cross. And so all of these things put together, we understand that no matter how unpleasant it may seem, there is a time coming when God's judgment will be brought onto those people that do evil against him. And so our golden text scripture comes from Jeremiah 11 and 20. It says, O Lord of hosts, that judgest righteously, that triest the reins and the heart, let me see thy vengeance on them, for unto thee have I revealed my cause. When we say, God, there's somebody that's doing something evil against me, I put that in your hands, basically. And it's not that we should go out seeking that vengeance. The scriptures are very clear that it's not our responsibility to seek that vengeance. But when that vengeance is brought to them by God, that is a just thing for him to do. That doesn't make it any more pleasant to think about some of these scriptures. Let's go to Psalm 137. I've got lots of little tabs in my Bible today. I'll just take them out as I use them. That way I won't get any more confused. Psalms 137. Now, again, we often think of the Psalms as flowery poetry, and this is somewhat poetic, but it is not in a good sense necessarily for the people that are on the receiving end of it. Psalm 137. It says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For they that had carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required us mirth or joy, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. Now you have to understand what the context was of this situation. The Israelites had been disobedient to God. They had been following after idols and doing lots of evil things. And God allowed the Babylonians to conquer them. And in that conquering, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. They killed lots of people. They carried away all the the beneficial people to them. They carried them away to Babylon, and they set them up as their slaves and servants. And they said to them, what we want you to do is, we know we just destroyed your city. We know we destroyed your families. We tore you apart. We brought you over here. But now we want you to sing us one of your happy songs that you used to. Remember all those happy songs you used to sing in the temple and praise your God? We want to hear those songs. And the Israelites are going, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to boycott, you might say, that because we can't express joy for, serving God in Jerusalem. Number one, we didn't do it. We were disobedient to God. Number two, you've destroyed Jerusalem and you've forced us to be prisoners. So, these people were under the oppression of the Babylonians. And it's interesting that God had allowed that to happen. God had allowed the Babylonians to conquer them. But at the same time, God was going to punish the Babylonians because they had hurt his children. Okay? And it seems like a conflict in our minds, and that's where we have to just accept the fact that our minds are limited in our ability to understand some of these things. And we have to believe and trust that God's ways are higher than our ways, and God's ways are different than our ways. So they're by the rivers, which would be the irrigation canals where all the farms were, and they said, you know what, you've put in a hard day in the fields and you've served us, but now we want you to sing a happy song about your God that you abandoned, and it has allowed you to be overrun. So they wouldn't do that. But this is what they ask in verse 4. It says, how long shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy, remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, or in other words, destroy it, even to the foundation thereof. It says, O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed. And then this is where it gets really dark. It says, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. And happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth the little ones against the stones. And that doesn't mean happy like joyful, but it's saying it's going to be blessed of God. It's going to be anointed of God that the Babylonians and the Edomites, which were the two groups that had conquered the Israelites, it says it's going to be blessed or anointed of God that their destruction will come. And that's because God had prophesied about that in verses in Jeremiah is what I was looking at. Jeremiah 25, verses 12 through 14. It says, and it shall come to pass. This is Jeremiah. Of course, Jeremiah was a prophet, and he was foretelling of what would happen when the Babylonians were paid back, or the vengeance was taken by God for what they did. It says, and it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it a perpetual desolations. I will bring upon that land all my works which I have pronounced against it, even all that is written in this book which Jeremiah hath prophesied against the nations. For many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of them also, and I will recompense them according to their deeds and according to the works of their own hands. And so he says all the terrible things that they did against the Israelites, all the killings, the rampage, all the destruction that they did, says all of those same things are going to happen to them. And it was not that the Israelites would take joy in that, but they would take a hope in that same process their own land would be restored to them. That at that time of judgment, it was that the Babylonians were destroyed, but at the same time the Israelites were given their promised land back. And so that concept of righteousness and that judgment that comes from God will carry over into the New Testament as well, that there will be a time at the end of times when those that are evil and those that have perpetrated evil against God will be rewarded according to their deeds. And those that are of God's family and God's children are going to be rewarded with the promise that he has made to them. If you look and remember through the scriptures, this is a very common scenario where you're going to be rewarded according to your deeds. One of the most, I hate to say entertaining because it's very dark in a way, but the story of Esther. Okay, you remember the story of Esther? It's not part of the lesson, but I think it relates well to this lesson. That Haman hated the Jewish people, and he wanted to kill them. And we know that the story goes that Esther hears about this, and she goes and solicits protection from the king. And when all the things come around, Mordecai, her uncle, that was a man of God and was kind of instigating all the help that was coming along. Mordecai gets blessed. Haman thinks he's going to be blessed. And he had made a gallows that he expected to hang Mordecai on because Mordecai had disrespected him. And so in the whole process, what happens? Mordecai ends up being blessed and honored by the king, and Haman ends up being hung on the very gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. And so that concept is that when you do evil against God, whatever evil you do is going to come back on you. Okay, that it is going to be paid back in the same way, and there's lots of evidence of that in the scriptures. The question is, how do we respond to that type of scenario? How do we react when that happens? Should we take joy in something bad happening to those around us? Should we should we sit back there and, oh, God, I can't wait to see what you're going to do to this person. They've been so terrible to me. I can't wait to see when they get what they deserve. That's not really the way the scriptures tell us to behave in this situation, because the vengeance belongs to God. It's his responsibility, and it's for his honor and his glory and his righteousness that all this will happen. So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy, of course, is when God was giving the law to Moses and telling them how they should behave and how they should react in every situation. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 35. And this is God's speaking. It says, "To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. Their foot shall slide in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste." And then it's jump down to verse 41. It says, "If I whet or sharpen my glittering sword, and mine hand take hold on judgment, I will render vengeance to mine enemies, and will reward them that hate me. I will make mine arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, and that with the blood of the slain and the captives, from the beginning of the revenges upon the enemy." That there's just a huge expectation here that God is going to take the vengeance for the evil that was done against his people. But it's clear that vengeance is God's responsibility. That vengeance is coming from him. Verse 43 says, "Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people." And again, it's not the rejoicing in the vengeance, but it's rejoicing in almost the freedom that we don't have to worry about it. Aren't you glad you don't have to worry about that? Well, I shouldn't say that, because some of you would really enjoy this. Wouldn't you hate to have to be the one to put the judgment on people. Okay, some people like it. Some people, oh, I could think of lots of ways to get back at this person. I could, but you know what that does? That affects your heart. That affects your soul. If you spend your time, your mental energy, and your abilities planning others' destructions, that will eventually overwhelm you. Okay, but if you say, you know what, they did me wrong. Okay, and God will take vengeance on that. That way, I don't have to worry about it. Yes. Yes, it does. It says we're supposed to pray for our enemies, and that's a hard thing to do. Okay, as we said, we may pray that destruction come on them, but I don't think you're right. That means that we should pray for them, and we'll get to that here in just a moment. I appreciate you bringing that because vengeance does belong to God. Let's go to Romans chapter 12. Did I read that earlier, didn't I? Nope, I didn't. Why didn't I mark that one? Oh, there it is. I told you I had too many marks. Romans chapter 12, verse 19. It says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Verse 20 continues, "Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him, and if he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. But be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." And so, that's an important part. It plays right along to what the sister said about to pray for those that do evil to us. It says to don't try to take that vengeance yourself, but give it over to God. But even in that, it says when your enemy falls into a problem, it says don't rejoice in that, but help them. If your enemy is hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. In other words, when the calamity that they deserve comes on them, you're supposed to be merciful to them. Okay? Doesn't that sound vaguely familiar based on our relationship with Christ? That we were his enemies, we deserved our punishment, but he was merciful to us, and he offered us a way out of that. And it says here that by doing those things, you're going to heap coals of fire on his head. Now, some people interpret that a variety of ways. That almost in a sarcastic, haha, I got you kind of thing. I'm going to prove that I'm better than you by being nice to you, even when you're going through bad things, and that you're going to make them feel bad, okay, by doing that. But here, there's a couple of ways that I think are more appropriate to look at that. When you heap coals of fire on their head. In the Old Testament, the coals were something that purified. Remember when the prophet was in the temple and he said he had unclean lips, the angel took a coal and put it on his lips to purify him. When you do good to those that have done evil towards you, it may prompt them towards purifying themselves. It may prompt their conscience to say, you know what, I deserved punishment from this person, but yet they're being nice to me. Maybe there is something to this God that they serve. Maybe there is something that to see in what they have. And so that's one way to do it. And the other thing that people talk about is, before, Bic lighters and little fire stick things and fire starters, that, having the ability to start fires was important. And so everybody had a little jar that had some embers that they would use to start a fire. And so, that would have been a beneficial thing to somebody. If your enemy was destitute and you said, here's some fire that you can have that will benefit you. And so I think more the prompting their conscience is an important part of that they will recognize God's goodness through what you do. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 30. just another example that in the New Testament that Christ is the one, or that God is the one that will take that vengeance. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 30, for we know him that hath said, vengeance belongeth unto me, and I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. That it is, when you are disobedient to God, when you do evil against God's people, there are many scriptures that tell us that that's a bad place to be. That you don't want to be on the bad side of God, and we know that's true. But we also, again, we have the freedom to allow that to happen in God's time, in God's way, and we don't have to take any responsibility for it. We don't have to take any pleasure in it or any joy in what we're doing. A couple of more examples of that in Psalm 69. This goes on a fairly long tirade against people. And, he's saying, let their table become a snare before them that should have been their welfare. Let it be a trap. Let their eyes be darkened, and, make them go blind, and pour out indignation on them, and let their habitation be desolate. It goes on and on. And the iniquity in verse 27 says, and iniquity unto their iniquities, and let them not come unto thy righteousness. Let them be blotted out as the book of the living, and not be written with the righteous. There will be a time of separation between the righteous and the unrighteous, and we know that that is consistent in the Old Testament as it is in the New Testament when Christ comes back. Psalm 109, verse 6. This one is a little bit more challenging because it puts a lot of the vengeance on the children and the households. Okay, so how does that work? Why would that be something that would be considered righteous? Should you be blamed for what your family did? Should you be blamed for what your parents did? Or should your children be blamed for what you did? I think it is important for us to understand that the actions that we do affect other people. Okay? If you live a sinful life, your children are going to be affected by that. If you live a sinful life, your coworkers are going to be affected by that. Your household and your community are going to be affected by your actions. Now, we also know that God is merciful, and just because someone in your family has committed sin doesn't mean that God can't forgive you and won't forgive you. So, okay, it's not a blanket statement that means that everybody that has sin in their house is going to be cursed of God. But we do need to recognize that when we do evil, it affects those that are around us. And that's what's going on here in Psalm 109, verse 6. It says, set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand. When he shall be judged, let him be condemned, and let his prayer become sin, that his days are few. In verse 9 it says, let his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. Let his children be continually vagabonds and beg. Let them seek their bread also out of their desolate places. That's an awfully harsh thing to say, but that's reality. When we are sinful in our nature, it affects those that are around us. When we take ourselves out as a father, if I take myself out of the family, or out of the lives of my family, my wife and children, then they become desolate because of the sin that has been in my life. And even in the New Testament, these types of curses continue. We're flip-flopping back and forth between New Testament and Old Testament pretty frequently here, and that is specifically to help us understand that these are not just Old Testament things, that this is something that carries over into the New Testament. In 2 Timothy 4 and 14, when Paul is writing, he's getting towards the end of his life. He knows that his time is short, and he's putting all of his things in order. He's saying, take care of this person, and I want blessings to go to this person, and this is going to happen, and I want this to happen, and I want you all to be good. But he's saying, then there's this Alexander the coppersmith. Okay? It seems like an odd thing to put in there, doesn't it? It says, Alexander the coppersmith. He says, he did me much evil. And it says, I want the Lord to reward him according to his works. Well, now, Paul, you were just saying, love everybody, be kind, do good works, but except Alexander the coppersmith, okay? Why is that? Well, it's because Paul knew the way of God. Paul knew that this man, and we don't even know what it was necessarily, but this man had battled not against Paul personally, it was against God. Paul was just the recipient of his anger. It was a recipient of his evil. Paul understood that this was an offense against God, not against himself. Okay, and Paul understood from the Old Testament writings and even from the New Testament where God says, I will take my vengeance. Paul recognized that this is a situation where God's judgment is going to be righteous. God's judgment is going to take place. And I'm accepting that judgment on this man. Okay, there's that God will do that, and that doesn't mean we can't be forgiving. That doesn't mean that we can't. If someone comes and asks forgiveness, and that there's lots of evidence in the scriptures that you're to forgive those that ask forgiveness. But there are times when people are unrepentant and they're unrighteous towards God, they're unholy towards God, and are cruel towards God's people. God takes that personally, and God will take vengeance on that. We are not called God's children by accident. Okay, when someone does something evil towards my children, that is the one of the fastest ways to get some aggressive action, shall we say? That there's a special anointing that goes into a parent when somebody harms their children, and God is the same way. He loves us as His children. He sent His only Son to die for us because He loved us so much. And when somebody mistreats His children, He takes it very personally, and so there will be a vengeance that comes from that. And so that morality that we see, we shouldn't rejoice in that, but we should expect it and understand that that's something that God will do. And so in the context of morality, how should we feel about that? Exodus chapter 23, verse 4. Again, this is when the children of Israel have just left Egypt. They have traveled through the wilderness, and this describes the instructions that God is giving to them. Chapter 23, verse 4 says, If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help, thou shalt surely help with him. It says, you know what? Even those that hate you and do terrible things to you, if you see them in need, stop and help them. Okay, that's hard for us to do. In our minds, we say, well, you know what? They overloaded their own donkey, and if it fell over in a ditch, that's their problem. Okay, our example of that would be, if we're driving down a snowy road and some hot shot in a four-wheel drive passes us going way too fast, and we pass him up alongside the road, and he's in the ditch. What do we say? He deserved that. I'm just going to keep on going. I got to be to church. I can't stop and help him. No, if we see someone, even if they've done something wrong, passing us on a snowy road isn't necessarily evil, but if we have had somebody do something evil to us and we see them in need, the scriptures command that we should help them out. Similarly, in Leviticus chapter 19, Leviticus 19 and 14, it says, Thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but shall fear thy God. I am the Lord. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shall thou judge thy neighbor. It says that thou shalt not go up among them as a talebearer. I'm going to abbreviate this here a little bit. Verse 18, it says, Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And it gives a good reason why. The last sentence of that says, because I am the Lord. That's like a parent saying, why should I do that? Because I'm the parent and I told you to. Okay? Why should I do what God says? The very question is interesting, isn't it? Why should I do what God says? Well, because he's God. And God says, if you see somebody that is struggling, says, don't add to their struggles. You know what? If you know somebody is hard of seeing, don't rearrange the furniture in their house. Okay. If you know somebody is poor, as it talks about here, it says don't take advantage of them if they're poor. It says on the other side, if they're rich, don't ingratiate yourself to them just because they're rich. Okay. It says, the righteousness of God is important, but he says treat everyone as yourself. And that, of course, Christ himself repeated that was an important thing, to love your neighbor as yourself. And why? Because I'm God and I said so. Okay, and that's just as simple as it is. And I say simple; it's not really simple, but the concept is definitely there for us. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. The Bible tells us that, and in Proverbs chapter 24, verse 17, it says, Rejoice not when thine enemy falleth, and let not thy heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it, and it displease him, and he turn away his wrath from him. It says, you know what? If you rejoice, the Lord's going to get you back. He's going to bless them. And so when you see God's judgment coming, don't rejoice in it. Accept it as God's judgment and God's righteousness, but don't do it in rejoice, because God will see what you're doing. And in chapter 25, verse 21, Proverbs 25 and 21, it says, If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he be thirsty, give him water to drink. For thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord shall reward thee. That is our responsibility, to do what God says, and our reward will come from him. It's just so critical for us to understand that God is the one in charge, and the peace that it gives us, as hard as it is for us to understand that there is going to be a judgment coming on evil, as hard as it is for us to accept that, you know what, there's going to be people that are going to perish at the end times. There's going to be people that even now that are suffering the consequences of the evil that they've done. It's hard for us to accept that. On one hand, it's hard for us not to rejoice in that, especially if we've been the one that has been hurt, on the other hand. But we can't. We have to not only leave it in God's hands, but be an agent of mercy if God calls us to do that in those circumstances. So that's the thing that's completely different about God's way than the way of the world. The way of the world says, if they did wrong to you, you have every right. Okay, we talk a lot about our rights in the United States. Okay, and it's easy for us to say, if someone did you wrong, it's your right to get revenge and to get justice. We call it justice, but often it's just revenge. And that's our right in our earthly mind. But God says, you don't have the right to do that. I have the right to do that, and I will do that in a time that is of my choosing and in a way that is my choosing. But don't misunderstand, there will be a judgment for that. And so the only benefit that we have beyond the hope that God has this vengeance in his mind is that we also have a way to escape the vengeance of God. That we have wronged God in our humanness, in our sin, in our thoughts, and God is merciful to us and has offered us a way of forgiveness so that we can escape the retribution that is coming for those that have been against God. So escape that punishment, escape that revenge by asking him into your heart and knowing that this judgment is coming, that's the way God has told us from the very beginning, that there will be a time of vengeance for the evil that has been in this world, but he's also told us there's a way that we can escape it. So we just as Christ did, it's not God's goal that any should perish. We should not rejoice in any that are not serving God, but that we understand that it is our responsibility to help in every situation that we can, so that they can come to know God, that their conscience would be seared or pricked, that they would come to know that there is a righteous God, that this vengeance is coming from. So I hope that helps us understand that lesson a little more clearly. There's still some challenges with our thought process and how we should do that and what God means by it. But the only thing I can tell you is leave it in God's hands, and he will take care of it for you. So God bless you and enjoy this beautiful day.